Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Forgotten Generation podcast with your host Troy. And I am joined by an inspiring person called Finlay. And he'll be talking about his social action and how he's been doing over the course of the year. So hello Finlay.
Hello, Troy.
How would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, just quickly, and thank you for calling me inspiring. You're so kind. So,
Oh,
um, I'm I'm Finlay Anderson. I'm 18. I'm from Dumfries and Galloway in the southwest of Scotland, and I'm also an I Will Scotland ambassador.
that's amazing. It's so good to have you here.
Thank
And so
you.
what is your social action?
Oh, my social action's a bit of everything. It's really exciting. So, it's kind of based on kind of three pillars or three main areas. I'm passionate about a lot of different topics, so I try to just sum it down to these three. And so those three are like the first one is children and young people's rights. I'm really passionate about that, and I've been involved in a lot of things relating to rights and children's rights and the progression, awareness, and promotion of children and young people's rights. So that's amazing. And another part of my social action often relates to youth participation and democracy. So that's looking at different youth participation platforms, whether that's youth groups, more formal groups, and looking at how young people can have their voice shared within those, and ensuring that young people's voices are heard, listened to, and respected. And then the third kind of area, and it's one that is more of like really personal to me, is disability awareness and advocacy, and within that tackling inequality, whether that be within education, employment, and just within life as a whole. And so those are the kind of three things that define my social action. And of course, I'm really passionate about them all.
Wow, it's just so uninspiring and the way you talk about your social action. It's just so moving, I've got to say. It's absolutely brilliant. And so you touched on about and disability and I think it's so important about like on the disability awareness and that actually young people with like on disabilities can have those opportunities, which I think is absolutely incredible. And so we've had like has there a bit like any been times where you felt like because of your social action, there's been challenges that you faced.
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest challenges is getting in the room in the first place. Often the spaces that exist, within society, whether those be in decision-making bodies like, governments, local authorities, councils, can often be inaccessible to young people. They don't, they're not spaces that are friendly for young people. And so one of the biggest challenges can be getting in the room. But once you're in the room, engaging, because, whether it's receiving, committee papers that are 500 pages, or people talking in language that you're not familiar with, it can be a huge challenge to try and engage with that. And, whether you're representing your own voice or the voices of young people, that can be a huge barrier to how much you can, input into those discussions. And so, that's something that I've tried to tackle myself, but it is a widespread issue. And, lots of bodies, whether they're charities, or things like the government, are, quite bad for making those spaces inaccessible. But something else that can be quite a big challenge is even, having those spaces in the first place too. And I'm sure you'll maybe be able to relate to this, Troy, over the
Yeah.
past couple of years with, you know, the issues around the cost of living and funding, a lot of, the organizations or the spaces that we maybe accessed a couple of years ago, and we're able to have discussions and dialogues with, a couple of years ago, have had to, maybe close or, reduce in size in order to, accommodate for the cost of living crisis and austerity. And so, that's been a big challenge, and, supporting those spaces to stay open to young people, and, that they're accessible and inclusive to young people as well. And, hopefully things will begin to get better. But, those are some of the challenges that I've faced so far.
Wow, it's so like empowering because these are the issues that I think young people are facing that are still going on, as well as cost of living crisis and all the issues that we are actually struggling in, which is so important for us to tackle and for the professionals to listen to us. And it takes me to like as a how did you even get to where you are today? Because you're so incredible with your because like with the things you've done, but actually how did you do it? how did it even get to where you are by speaking to me today?
Oh, that is a long story, but I'll try and summarize it the best I can because it has been quite the journey, and it's one that didn't start in the nicest of ways. And so go starting at the start, and we'll maybe go in chronological order. Um, I had a really difficult time in secondary school in terms of getting the support that I needed in order to access my education, in terms of making friends. I was quite isolated. I didn't get that support that I needed from school and from education. And so, um, again, that was really challenging for me. That had, lots of negative effects on me, whether that was my mental health or my health more generally. I wasn't in the best position at that time. And I was often surrounded by professionals, whether those are health professionals, teachers, support teachers, um, at the time who just didn't listen to me. I was in, spaces and meetings about myself, and whether those were meetings for my healthcare plan, my child's plan as we have in Scotland. I'm not sure what the equivalent is in England. Um, and I wasn't allowed to, participate in those discussions. I was just told what was going to happen to me. I didn't get to have a say in the decisions which ultimately affected, my life and the opportunities that I had. And that had a big impact on me. And as you can imagine, that would have been quite frustrating for me. And, so I kind of, my health deteriorated over a course of a couple of years, and things got much worse. And eventually it just got to a point where, I'd had enough. I couldn't do this any longer. And so at that point, I decided to, or I was referred to an advocacy agency in Scotland called My Rights, My Say. And so for that, although I had to wait quite a little time to get an advocate, I eventually got one. And advocates are people who, stand up for, our rights. And so I was able to bring someone that I trusted, that was independent from all people that were involved at the time, to really be able to share my views on my behalf. And so it was incredible. So, almost instantly, my views started to be heard. And, I was really inspired by that process because I imagine that there's so many other young people who were in similar situations to my own, who weren't being heard, who weren't being listened to, whose rights weren't being respected. And, I've seen the impact that advocacy had on me. And so I was really inspired by that. And even though I did have an advocate, we faced a number of challenges in terms of eventually getting the support. But, in the end, things did end up getting where we needed them to be, but we should never have had to have like face those challenges and get in there in the first place. And so, I went through that whole process of, understanding advocacy, going through advocacy and getting the support that I needed from them. And that kind of kick-started my passion for youth voice. And so from there, I afterwards that we're maybe now into 2021, so only 3 years ago now, I became a young advisor for the Children and Young People's Commissioner for Scotland. Again, it was very much rights-based, children and young people's rights. Um, and with as a young advisor, I worked with other incredible young people from across Scotland, some who'd had similar experiences to my own, some who'd had the completely opposite. And that was incredible to learn, about them and what they'd been doing. And together we did things like campaign for the UNCRC incorporation, which at the time didn't look very likely. And so it was incredible to do that. I was also part of the European network of young advisors, which brought together similar groups of young people from across different areas and regions in Europe. And I was involved in that for 2 years. And each year they pick like a topic that they want to discuss, and they produce recommendations for different governments and other organizations. And as part of that, the first year was on climate justice, which wasn't something that I was actually quite familiar with at the time. And, it was great to look at, things like climate change, things like climate anxiety, the impact of climate change upon young people's rights, and how it was all interlinked. And so that was incredible. And then in the second year, we looked at the role of independent human rights institutions. So, that's what the office was. And so it was looking at, their role and their impact, but not just in Scotland, but in other countries across Europe, across the world, and so that was incredible as well. And because each one is, slightly different, some are, totally independent from the government, or some are maybe perhaps funded by the government. And so it was looking, well, what what's different, and how does that impact them? Can they provide, for example, more scrutiny at the government and the legislation that's passed, and or can they, or for example, can another one protect and promote children's rights better? And how are they doing that? And so that was really fascinating as well. Um, and then after that, or well, I wouldn't really say after that. It was kind of the same time because I just started saying yes, 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 and ended up involved in so many
Wow.
things. But I went on to become a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament, which was incredible. And as part of that, in my local region, you become a member of Dumfries and Galloway Youth Council. And so, looking at our local region and working with the council directly, and that was really, really good. I, for 2 years, sat on my council's education and learning committee. So I worked directly with elected councillors, council officials, and discussed all things education, which for me at the time was really, really exciting. And it was incredible to do that. And then eventually, after a year, I became the chairperson of Dumfries and Galloway Youth Council, so I got to kind of lead on the discussions that were happening and the people that we were working with, the sessions that we were holding, which was a big challenge at the time, but was also a huge learning experience and something that I'm really, really grateful for. Um, and at the same time as that, unbelievably, I got involved in Young Scot, to young people in Scotland. That'll be really familiar, but I'm not sure if listeners in England will be familiar. But Young Scot's essentially just a big national organization slash charity in Scotland that is all things young people. So whether it's discounts for young people, free bus travel for young people, young people's voice, um, Young Scott is really at the center and heart of that, and they host panels for young people. And I was fortunate enough to be on a few of the panels. And so the first one that I was part of was called the Young Person's Guarantee. And so the Young Person's Guarantee is a charter in a similar sense to the I Will Charter. And it looks at improving employment opportunities for young people, whether they're coming out of school, and and perhaps if they leave school early or they don't finish school, and it involves working directly with local authorities and different employment organizations. And that was kind of incredible as well, because again, it wasn't an area that I was entirely comfortable with, or not comfortable is not the right word, but familiar with. I was still in school at the time, and that was great. And then that kind of closed up, and then I got involved in my second panel, which was called the Youth VIP panel. Sounds so fancy, but really
Wow.
it's just it's just all things volunteering. And so it looked in a kind of similar sense to the other panel. It was looking at how we can improve volunteering opportunities for young people across Scotland, and looking at the barriers and challenges that young people face, whether that's things like disabilities, whether it's things like geography, and whether they're from a rural background. And that was kind of incredible because being able to input with young people who had so many different unique experiences. It was great to have the discussions within that. We got to go to um the SCVO conference in Edinburgh and do a workshop there. And that's a conference that brings together, lots of the third sector charities across Scotland. And so, there was a massive opportunity to kind of raise awareness of ways in which they can get young people involved. So that was also fascinating. And then kind of more recently, or towards the end of last year, I became a board trustee of a charity called Partners in Advocacy.
Ooh.
Um, which again, it stems back to, my roots in advocacy. And they're also kind of, I don't know how to describe this, which is really bad because I am on the board, but it's almost like the like kind of umbrella charity to My Rights, My Say, who I received independent advocacy support with. And there's lots of other charities that have come together to form Partners in Advocacy, that work together, that share resources, And it's incredible. And so I work alongside other board trustees and members of the senior leadership team to work, in the best interests of the charity. And, that can involve things like attending board meetings or attending subgroups, um, looking at different strategies that we have, different policies that we have. And then more recently, I got to do this exciting thing called inputting into a position paper. And we produced one of those so that for the Scottish government, because something that is really quite bad at the moment is the waiting list for advocacy services, because there isn't the funding at the moment. We can't increase the number of advocates that we have, and there's so many young people that are facing barriers to their education, amongst other things, that the waiting lists are just going up and up and up. And we've reached a point where it's really, really unacceptable and something needs to change. And so I got to input, in terms of my experiences and my thoughts into a position paper, which was really exciting. And, it'll be great to see, the impact that that has. So that's kind of part of advocacy. And I know I've been rambling for a while,
It's
so I'll come
great.
to I will. I'll come to I will. We've reached the I will movement, which I've been holding off on. It's kind of strange in terms of how I got involved in the I will movement. I remember in 2022, I am when that cohort of I Will Ambassadors was announced. And I was a part of that cohort, and seeing all these young people get involved in something that looked so official. And so you could look at people at that time, you could look at people's stories and people's journeys, and it was so inspiring. And I can remember just being so disappointed that I missed out, because I started seeing that a week after the deadline. And so when it came to the 2023 ambassador cohort, I thought about it and I thought about it and I thought about it. And then eventually I forgot about it, which was really bad. And then the deadline was extended. I can remember this. The deadline was extended. I ended up applying at the last minute. And, it was one of the greatest decisions of my life, because, I've had so many opportunities through the I Will movement, and I've met so many incredible people like yourself. And I suppose just to kind of highlight some of the opportunities that I've had, I got to go, I've been to London twice, which is not something that I'd done in a couple of years. Being in Scotland, it's rare that I go down to London. So for the first time, I got to attend a gathering by the EU delegation, and it was all about how we can improve relations between young people in the UK and young people in the EU. And so that was really incredible and inspiring. And I also got to be on a roundtable discussion in terms of youth voice, which was fantastic. And then the second time that I was there, I was invited to attend a all-party parliamentary group on youth affairs. And, excitingly enough, this was about the general election before the general election was announced. And so that was great. And it was great to hear again from all the other young people that were there, because there was other members of the youth parliament, there was members of national organizations, there was young people who were just simply interested. And so it was great to hear all these different perspectives. And because at that time, things like for policy discussions around, like, for example, votes at 16, I think the British Youth Council had just closed at that point. And so there was a lot of kind of worry about what was going to happen, because were young people's voices going to be missed out? Who was going to fill the gap there? And so that was really incredible. And then, keeping on the topic of I Will, I recently joined the mobilization group, which is incredible. And so I get to work alongside a few other I Will ambassadors in terms of kind of progressing the movement. I think my kind of focus is on building the movement, on which I got to speak about at our first I Will assembly earlier in the year, which was great too. And so I'm really looking forward in terms of continuing that role, and of course meeting the new ambassadors, which is really, really exciting. So again, that kind of brings me to where we are today, but I have missed out a lot of stuff. We'd be here until midnight if we wanted to go for everything. So yeah.
Wow, just so many like honestly incredible things you've done. Like your journey has just gone like a shooting star in a way, gone through like a rocket, in fact, gone through all of these things up to I will. It's like, whoa. But honestly, it's just so amazing that actually, and because like a young person like yourself is actually doing these things to inspire young people and for them to have that voice, which is so important.
Thank you.
It's just absolutely amazing. I'm like about actually listening to you. I was just like, this is incredible. Like, this is just someone who really wants to make a difference and has done so many things and is already making changes. You're a change maker.
Oh, thank you, Troy.
Absolutely, absolutely are. Indeed. And so, what would be your advice to the government about the issues that actually young people are dealing with? And what do you want them to do moving forward?
Oh, this is a really exciting topic at the moment because, of course, we've got a new government and new people involved, fresh minds, fresh ideas. And so I think, to kind of keep it simple in some ways, I think, the most important thing you can do is listen to young people. And, when you're listening to young people, you need to respect them. You need to, provide things like feedback loops. So tell them the impact of their voice. If you're talking about making change and a young person suggests something, it's always important to go back to them and say how their voices influence that change, and how that's been taken on board. But there's a lot of challenges in the road of that the government will have to face, of course, in terms of, making youth voice accessible, inclusive, and that is going to be a really big challenge. Again, going back to the things like, funding, which has been cut over the past several years, young people have been going unheard for so long. I think young people have lost a lot of trust within politicians. I know that I have myself. I remember when I first was kind of introduced to the space, and I was really enthusiastic, and then you start speaking to, lots of different decision makers, and you kind of go through that process where actually not a lot changes, or you'll do a lot of work on something and then it just meets a dead end. And, that can be really, really frustrating. And so it's really important that they try their best to build back that trust. And, that's not going to be something that happens instantly, it's something that happens easy. And that is going to take a while, but it's so important that they remain enthusiastic because, it is a kind of relationship that um requires both parties, if we're talking about young people and politicians as parties, to really work together. And that'll work best, if you can support youth organizations, youth work, youth participation structures like, the Scottish Youth Parliament, like the Youth Parliament, like I Will, and all the different organizations out with and between. And it's clear that they've not been getting the support that they needed over the past couple of years. And so, of course, there's no magic, money tree or switch to instantly reverse all the damage that's been done to them. But I think, by working together, you can heal wounds. Um, it's so important that they look at and listen to local research. So much work goes on by different local and regional and sometimes national organizations that work directly with young people, that, that have young people involved in their organizations every day, and they do their own research. I've actually brought some along with me to show you, and if I was here in person I would give you copies of these. But local
Absolutely.
research that asks young people what's working, what's not working, what could change, and whether that's having focusing on, for example, we did one in Dumfries and Galloway called the Youth Matters Report, which brought together young people with additional support needs and disabilities, and it was led, designed, and facilitated by young people with additional support needs and disabilities. And it brought together um, young people into workshops to have their voices heard. And at the same time, it also brought together some of the lead professionals in different sectors. So whether that was housing, education and inclusion, employment, and it brought all these people into this space. And again, it was incredible. Just you could see, so many ideas being created, and it's incredible all the feedback we got from it, and um both from the young people and from the professionals involved. And from that, we produced, a number of recommendations that these organizations could take away and embed within, their organizations. And, that was amazing. And when we officially launched the report in 2023, we produced this thing called a pledge box. And so organizations could make a pledge based on the report and recommendations if they wanted to focus on a particular part, if they wanted to commit to doing a specific thing. And that was amazing because just in one night we had upwards of, I believe it was 70 pledges from different local organizations. And so that was great too. And again, kind of just going over some other local research things that I have, just because, it's always good to give examples. I think at the Children and Young People's Commissioner's Office for Scotland, we worked with all local authorities in Scotland to produce a report that was looking at mental health counselling in schools. Because of course there's an ongoing mental health crisis. This is something that's been getting worse for a number of years. And it's clear that young people aren't being supported in the way that they need to. And so this report looked at what young people were saying, and it looked at the counselling services that were available in schools. And so it reviewed them by working with the local authorities in terms of looking at how they delivered them, when they were available, who's eligible to be able to receive the counselling in schools. Do they have services in that are available during the holidays and school breaks? Are there transitions to different services? So, as a young person who maybe receives something similar in primary school, come into secondary school and are they receiving the support that they need? And what happens when someone becomes a school leaver? And so it looked at all them different kind of areas, and as well a bit in terms of how young people can find out about the services available. And it brought them together in this report, and we analyzed all that information, and again produced a number of recommendations. And we then had a process where we worked alongside the Scottish Government and COSLA, which is, just to kind of summarize what COSLA is, again, it's an organization that kind of represents the local authorities. All the local authorities across Scotland, which there's 32, have an input into COSLA, and so they work directly with the local authorities, and so it kind of streamlines them. And so that would be shared for that kind of stream. And then just to cover our third kind of topic in terms of local research, which was a bigger one that we had in Dumfries and Galloway. Following the Year of Young People, which was in 2018, Dumfries and Galloway Council received funding to produce a report based on youth voice. And infamously, this was titled the 10,000 Voices Report. And so it involved consulting and engaging with 10,000 young people in Dumfries and Galloway and hearing their views, opinions, what mattered to them the most, and what information they would like to learn about. And it was incredible because that's over half of the young people that are in this region. And of course, it was a big piece of work. But by the end of it, any organization can identify the 5 biggest issues for young people, the 5 biggest things that they would like to know more about. And then that information is also separated, into different categories. So whether it's young people who, are disabled or have additional support needs, or who are part of the LGBT community, or whether they're from a specific postcode area. And so that's incredible. And so there's so many different forms of local research that governments could use to, empower their policies, but also to empower young people as well. And I think that one of the biggest pieces of advice for them would be to listen to young people, listen to the research, and keep working together.
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to say is, and what would be your on advice to any young person who wants to take part in youth social action?
Oh, and another lovely question, and thank you so much for that, Try. I suppose it can be quite daunting when you first hear the words youth social action, because what does that actually mean? What does that look like? Who's involved in that? And I myself was initially put off with with the idea of what that involves, and it can be so daunting again to get started. So my advice would be, from day one, you don't have to be doing something that requires hours and hours of commitment. You can really start small. You can start at home. You can start with things that you're comfortable with and things that you're passionate about. And it's okay if you don't know what your passions are, because I was in that situation too. There was a time when I didn't know what I wanted to do, what I liked, what I didn't like. And so it really provides you with an opportunity to experiment and to even to get to know yourself. And so looking at things like volunteering with organizations, whether those are national kind of platforms like I talked about earlier with such as the I Will movement or Young Scot or the youth parliaments if you're passionate about youth voice, or perhaps you're maybe interested in something that's a bit more local to you. And you could look at things like I'm sure there'll be different community groups that you're based at that are based in your area. There could be different youth participation platforms, whether those are like local youth assemblies, local youth councils, or perhaps even pupil councils in schools. They can be a great way to get started. And then as well, once you start to get involved in those, again, you'll find out a bit more about what you like and what you don't like, but you'll also get to hear from other young people who are on those platforms who will maybe share some of the opportunities that are coming up within the organizations that they're involved in. And that's one of the ways that, I started to get more involved because, it can seem quite a hidden world almost at first because you'll maybe see one opportunity and another opportunity and you can't quite see the link between them. But often, once you start to get involved in these spaces, you'll find and come across people that you're familiar with, which is always amazing. There's so many groups that I'm in that I know other people in, or it's a friend of a friend. That is an incredible process to go through. And again, so just starting small, starting local, and try to have fun. If something's not fun or something you're not enjoying something, don't be afraid to actually take a step back and say, actually, maybe I don't want to be involved in this. I'd maybe like to be involved in something else. And of course, speak to people as well. Um, Look at national organizations. They might even have a branch that's in your local community, that you'd like to get involved in. Be vigilant and looking out for things and never give up.
I love it. It's so moving. Thank you so much indeed, Finlay. And that's it for this episode today. So thank you so much for joining us, Finlay. Please support the podcast by subscribing and rating the podcast. I'd love to hear what you like and what could be better for future episodes. If you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram and iwill.troy and also on X, iwill_Troy. Tune in to next week's episode.